and welcome back to the afternoon session of our Policy Roundtable. I hope that those in the room and those on Zoom have had a good lunch meeting in which they could take a little break and free some headspace for the next session, which is going to be at least hopefully as interesting and dynamic and exciting as the morning session. A reminder, everyone, again, we are tuning in from the Norwegian House for Research and Innovation in Brussels. And again, we're very happy and thankful that they host our big policy roundtable event. And this afternoon session will have the following structure. At the very beginning, we will hear from two presentations, then we'll have a little break, and then we will return for the grand finale, which will be a long finale because it will take about 2 hours of discussion. The PIs of the 10 Horizon 2020 projects present and a select crowd of interested MEPs and migrant organizations will contribute. And of course, if you are seeing this online, feel free to drop us a question on the Slido website. And if you are following on social media, you can also find us by following the hashtag #InclusiveEurope2022. So back in Brussels, back in the live session, I'm going to give you a more concrete breakdown of the schedule for what's happening right now. So, in the immediate succession to my welcome afternoon speech, we will hear from Luca Barani from the DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. And immediately afterwards, we will welcome a representative from Top Manta, Abdoulaye Papalayesek, who will discuss on the topic of streetwear and legal labor market, which would tie very nicely in with morning session presentations. Without any further ado, I give the word to Luca Barani. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm aware that there's not after lunch, especially after so many hours of video conferences. A hybrid form. Sorry. Is me or no? Okay. Is this one?
Sorry, but I think it's my microphone. Hey, it's my microphone that's working. So it's me breathing.
Okay. So I will try to rise to the challenge, and I understand that in the audience you have many more people that are already familiar with Horizon 2020 and with its success or Horizon Europe. So I will try to interest you in a different kind of funding, which is the AMIF, which is the DG Home. I'm working in DG Home. Previously I was working in DG Amp, but now I moved to DG Home, and it's the fund for migration, asylum, integration, and specific topics. And actually, this month, AMIF is publishing different calls on these 3 topics: asylum, migration, and integration. So you are most welcome to check on the website of the Commission. I will give you the link at the end. For the Union actions, so for transnational actions, which are not so different from in design from the Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe calls. But these AMIF calls on integration are linked to the action plan 2021-2027, which is the successor to a previous action plan in 2016, which was aimed mainly to third country nationals. And it was a direct answer to the challenge of the 2015-2016 influx of migrants and refugees. But for the next period, so for the 2021 and 2027 period, we have this new action plan that tries to build on top of the experience and of the hopefully learned lessons of the previous action plan. So we try to be forward-looking and also with a kind of medium, long-term perspective in order to link three things. One is the action plan that is on concrete measures, a legislative package that was also adopted at the same time in 2020 on migration and asylum, and also with the funding opportunities that are part of the 2021 and 2027 cycle. So the action plan tries to mediate between the legislative arm and the funding one, and is trying to step up in terms of the support that is offered by the Commission on concrete aspects of the integration journey, of the integration process, which, as we know, is not a short one. It's a complex process that can take many years. We decided to have this 7-year horizon because it's linked to the programming period of how the Commission and the European funds work. We could, of course, have extended further, but it would not have been practical in terms of administrative procedures. What is new in this action plan in respect of the old one, and that we try to have a gender dimension mainstreamed across all the different actions and measures contained in the plan, and also to move from the previous scope on third country nationals, so basically people that have a different citizenship as that of the European Union citizens, to all people with a migrant background, which can and should include, for instance, EU citizens, but which have a parent, both parents, possibly even grandparents that were immigrant in the European Union. And because of that, because of this extension of the scope, is an action plan on integration as the previous one, but also on inclusion. Because also what we learned from the previous action plan is that when you talk about integration to children or to youth that is born, raised, educated in one of the member states of the European Union, talking about integration is they consider it's more for their parents, whereas they are born here, they were raised here, and so some of the time they feel as members of the local or of the regional or the national communities as other people. So because of that, we added this inclusion also aspect on top of integration. So the first comers, newcomers, as we see that there is still need to integrate, unfortunately, possible new refugees, new migrants, because we know that depending on different crises, European Union is subject to influx of new people that sometimes come also in very dramatic conditions. So what are the priorities of the action plan? Because these priorities are being used as in order also to orientate, for instance, the funding of the transnational union actions. So we have, in terms of architecture, we have general principles, so we'll go very quickly about that. And after we have, so to speak, sectoral priorities, which are specific to certain sectors. They are, if you want, vertical priorities on specific sectors that we consider to the building bricks or the building blocks of successful integration. And after we have more horizontal priorities, which should cut across the different sectoral measures. So in terms of general principles, Again, this is part of a package that, to a certain extent, just builds on the previous action plan. So it is important to have an inclusion for all principle, so not having targeted to a specific group or to a specific nationality or to a specific category of migrants. Could be a refugee or labor migrants or family reunification. Is inclusion for all, which is, in our view, is also the best way to proceed in terms of also of inclusion of new generations of Europeans, which have perhaps a migrant background, but are born and they are raised here. As I already mentioned, an important gender and anti-discrimination horizontal principle. What we try to do is also to not to cater to the emergency, to the short term, but also to have to consider that the integration is a long-term process that has different stages, and not the different measures are not always appropriate at different stages of the of this process. And again, the European Commission cannot do everything on its own. There is a lot of calls to work together with the local, with the regional, with the national where appropriate, but also with civil society, social partners. So the different actors that we know, the NGOs, the civil society actors that we know are already active and they're already doing a lot of the heavy lifting, when even in terms of first reception, welcoming, but also accompanying the people with migrant background in their journey. And finally, we try to be as targeted in terms of added value that we can provide with the different measures of the action plan, which are 58. So I will not, don't worry, I will not go one by one. I will just skip over the vertical priorities. So there are 4, is employment, education, housing, and health. This was, the action plan was adopted in November 2020. And as you can see, I mean, also to a certain extent, specifically in the issue of housing and health, which were revealed as very, very critical or very problematic during the COVID crisis. These were 2 of the building blocks in terms of access, in terms of non-discrimination or equally of the rights of access to these 2 areas, housing and health, which proved to be specifically problematic and unfortunately having an impact on even on life and death of people. So what is integration, at least in the action plan, is a traditional definition that is used at European level. It's a 2-way process, meaning that there are rights and there are obligations. There is an implied respect for the basic values of the host societies, but at the same time, there is also certain aspects that have to be provided by the host societies in order to facilitate the integration of newcomers or people that have a migrant background. And again, I repeat, is access, non-discriminatory access to employment, to the rightful education, to housing, and to health, which doesn't is not the full spectrum of important aspects of integration. We could discuss many hours about what are the different aspects of integration, but this just because we want to be as targeted as possible and just to go to try to cover the most ground with the limited resources that we have. So this is the 4 sectoral priorities. And also we have, we have also horizontal priorities. Here you see 5 of them. I will just concentrate again in just one of them, because again, this, in my view, proved to be important during the COVID pandemic, which is the level of digital access. And this, you can have it both in housing, in health, employment, education. And this, again, is an horizontal principle, but which, again, I think it was proved to be very, very important, and is going to be important also in the near future, which how we grant equal digital access to services or to provision of services that is also increasingly digitalized. We know that after the, specifically in the middle of the crisis, of the pandemic crisis, offices, services shut down physically and they moved online. And this was also a major adaptation shock for many of the migrants, which sometimes they didn't have the hardware or the software or the skills or the capacity to adapt, and also as of many European citizens. So the migrants are not the only one that had difficulties to struggle with this shift. Also, I struggle sometimes with the shift to a full digital provision of services. Sometimes you don't talk anymore with a human being, but just with chatbot. And for certain, the most vulnerable among migrants, this also can have a difficult, an extra difficulties of access. So, of course, we support member states in having an open provision of service in a digital form. And I know, for instance, some of these projects that are funded by Horizon 2020 also took care of the design of, for instance, of digital services that are as human-centric and are not an additional obstacle or additional hurdle for instance, for the most vulnerable in terms of access to the basic services. So, but this is mostly on the offer side, if you want, of the of digital services. There is also the demand, or at least the side of migrants, which sometimes, again, I repeat, they don't have the hardware, the software, or the soft skills to adapt and to be able to have, even if the design is very open, they also have additional specific difficulties in order to have a non-discriminatory and access of these new digital services, which I think they are going to be here to stay. So even if we moved in the emergency during the pandemic, all the signs is that an increased offer of digital services is here to stay as a legacy of the pandemic. And migrants and people with migrant background, they have also to raise, so to speak, their capacities or their skills in order to be able to profit from this increasingly digital environment. So here I'm talking about, there are both sides, so the offer of digital services and the demand, on the demand side, the capacity to raise to the level of, to these new levels of digital services. And this, we try to do it both with our support to the different levels, so to the local, to the regional, or to the national, but also trying to intervene via the support provided by NGOs, by civil societies, and to migrants themselves in order to adapt and to be able to profit from this new level of services. So, and this, of course, has to be, at least on the side of DG Home, has to be done in coherence with one of the priorities of this commission, of the van der Leyen Commission, which is to increase the digital shift, the increasing digitalization of society. And so we are not going to stop the way it is to be done, but we'll try to be as inclusive and as open as possible also for migrants and people with migrant background. Here, I thank you for your attention, and to follow the developments, the progress of the action plan on integration and inclusion, I suggest that you follow on European website on integration, where basically we also try to monitor the progress and, for instance, also the calls for funding under AMIF, which, as I said before, they are currently being rolled out for the 2021 call. Thank you very much.
I think we could have a little bit of a Q&A session very quickly, just because I see that there are a lot of people that have a lot of attention for what Luca just finished presenting. So if there is anybody who has a very quick question or curiosity, yes, Peter, just let me give you the microphone.
I was just wondering, what is the current status of and role of the Knowledge Centre on Migration, which is due to be established in the JRC?
Thank you very much. My understanding is that GRC, there is this knowledge center on migration and demography, and that they were already providing products on migration with the Atlas of Migration, with analysis, but now they are moving forward more to demography. So that they are looking at the basic structural, if you want, trends of population dynamics in Europe, which to a certain extent, it makes sense because migration flows, even as impressive as they can be, they are residual. So these are very long-term trends. We are talking about decades, even more, where basically we know that Europe is aging and is aging fastly. And this is a structural trend, is a mega trend, if you want, and of which GRC is rightly so, in my view, focusing on. And this is, in my view, is going to be a structural the reason for a structural need of migrants, just because if I take the example of a country that I know better, which is Italy, already between now, before and after pandemic, we are back at the level of the labor market participation around 67 or 68%. So we are back at the same rate of participation in the labor market, but in the meantime, we lost something like 45,000 people, just because people were just during the pandemic. So in 2 years, the total numbers of workforce just decreased. So if you want to maintain, if you want to have a recovery, you also need, and this is across Europe, there are more and more skill shortages on top of the skills mismatch that was before. So if you want a recovery, you also need additional workforce, and this, it cannot be magically created. So there is a space for increased migration flows. This perhaps is not a welcome development for some, but is impossible to have a strong recovery without a certain number of labor migration, just because the skill shortages are the same across Europe, in the healthcare, in logistics, in many different specific sectors. So as the shortages are simultaneously in all member states, there is no possibility for mobility of few citizens to fill these gaps. You need to recruit from abroad. So, and GRC is also looking, it's more and more, in my understanding, specializing on this demographic aspect.
Thank you, and I take the opportunity to ask you a question myself,
Sure.
if I may. I'm just curious, because a lot of the projects, including some of the projects here in the room, have analyzed labor force dynamics. And I was also kind of stimulate you to think about the digital tools that you are suggesting, like it's a digitalized services and so on. We have two projects at least in the room that developed apps. And if I'm not mistaken, Mikado is entirely dedicated to the construction of digital tools for the interface between migrants and public authorities.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, I'm sure there are many other examples that are not in the room, even though I hope they listen to us online. Yeah. How does the Commission, and particularly DG Home in your case, take value of this type of discovery? That of course this event is one of the ways in which we try to get in touch with you and tell you what we have found. But there are European money has been invested in developing precisely these apparently very good, right, applications. So in which way, for example, is the European Commission having a track record or a database of such digital tools that are available? We also have in another project digital tools for cultural heritage and so on. Is there a way already developed, or are there plans to develop some form of index or some form of overview of all these individual outcomes from individual projects that cumulatively perhaps would make a difference?
Sure. I mean, again, I'm taking the perspective of DG Home on this aspect. For instance, I think it was last call in 2020, but also in previous years, we tried to have, in the framework of AMIF, we tried to encourage networks and consortia of local and regional authorities to provide as relevant and as inclusive access to migrants and to people with migrant background. And we clearly try to push or to orient them to have as an innovative approach. And so one of them, and this is going to be more and more in the future calls of the AMIF, that we try to exactly to tap the potential of the capital of knowledge, of also of know-how and of the apps, as you mentioned. So you mentioned Mikado, but I think there is also MIC, for instance, that is another project of Horizon 2020 that was exactly trying to give, or Nadine, to have a kind of proof of concept tools, which, as they are not property, so they are open source, open access, they can also be taken on board from providers or from local authorities or from associations in order to be used with the public for which they are designed to a certain extent.
Can I interject here?
Just as long as you have a microphone.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Anna was asking, actually, because in the Sirius project we have elaborated an app, I introduced it before, but I think that, you know, rolling it out through the Commission would have a very different impact. So really, I think the question that you were asking is really crucial in the sense that how far, you know, the Commission out, we know that you only look at one aspect, but I mean, your DGs more in general, other DGs are really, you know, aware of first of the amount of tools that are available and how far they can, you know, provide further avenues for these tools to be, you know, really exploited, actually. Because we've been working with local authorities, for example, with an NGO, I mentioned this before, you know, to pilot it. But the audiences we can reach across countries isn't absolutely comparable with the audience that the EU, I mean, the Commission could reach if it decided to implement, you know, this, to make it yours, you know, of this project, of these tools that have been funded by taxpayer money, actually.
No, sure.
No, so really a further investment in that direction would really help.
Yeah, because I mean, the fact is, I mean, if my understanding is correct, is that we are financing. So, I mean, at least in AMIF, it is clear with the money that we have, with the amount of funds that are at our disposal, we are mostly financing pilot projects or for consortia to develop innovative tools, which of course after they are, if you want, they are a bit caught in a kind of gap between the pilot and the, if you want, the mass production or the adoption from, and indeed this is, I think, is a challenge to a certain extent. Also because, just to give you an example, what the DGOM did in terms of skills recognition. So, which is another aspect which is more under education for the integration and inclusion of. DGOM, I mean the Commission in general, developed this profile tool for third country nationals, which don't have qualifications or diplomas that are immediately compatible with the system in place inside the European Union. So we try to push it to speak to the public, and in order to do so, we integrated in the Europass, which is the CV, is the European format CV. Now the problem is the following: this is a European tool, so and is advertised and is pushed by European Commission. The fact is that I don't have to tell you in terms of labor market, is that labor market are still very segmented within the European Union. CVs follow rules, conventions, norms, and so forth that sometimes are very specific to a niche labor market. So even when the Commission tries to push a harmonized European level app, tool, format, whatever, there is a lot of resistance from the, to speak, on the ground for good reasons, to adopt a unified, harmonized tool. So I wouldn't think that just because the Commission says so, this is going to be adopted. For the latest figures that I have, in Europass, I don't remember, I think last year, out of 6 or 7 million people that are registered in Europass, so basically they make the effort to download and to upload, because now is online cloud CD. Of the 6-7 millions, now I don't have the figures just out of my mind, but there are, I think, 200,000 or 230,000 people that are registered users from abroad. So, from Turkey, from India, from third countries, which our interpretation is that are interested eventually to come to work here, because if not, why they should make the effort of passing through Europass. And out of this, very little they're using this per country national profile tool, and where it's mostly used is when they arrive, and this is in Italy, in Greece, and for reasons that I cannot fathom, in the UK. So these are the 3 countries where, because there are no national tools equivalent, so basically they are using the European profile tool. So basically, you also need, in order to have this kind of adoption on the ground, you also need to have a certain conditions that you feel a need. And the problem is how to make your way in a competitive situation, in a competitive landscape, because my impression is also that because of the pandemic, there is a huge digital litter landscape of apps and of tools that were just launched, that were left there after the peak of the crisis, and there is like in outer space, you have a lot of detritus that it just is not updated anymore, is not, and it just fills the space. So it's not conducive, and also we are also aware that just by pushing pilot projects, you are not going to be able to speak to break through.
Thank you very much. I think we were precisely looking for this type of insights. So I'm very, very thankful for your comments, Luca. Once again, a hand of applause.